item is the consent agenda. I don't know, Eric, there's only 3 items. I don't see any transactions that need any discussion, but is there anything else that you wanted to talk about on the consent agenda before we look for a motion on the minutes?
Nope.
Okay. So the only item then on our consent agenda is the meeting minutes from our last meeting of November 12th last year. Can we get a motion to approve those minutes?
I motion, Lonnie.
Okay, thanks, Lonnie. Do we have a second?
I will second that motion. Jamie Cosgrove.
Okay, thanks, Jamie.
And
All right, any discussion, any comments on the minutes? Okay, let's take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
And I'll abstain because I was not in attendance.
Was that you, Lisa?
Yeah, that's me. Sorry, Lisa Shanahan. I'm abstaining because I was not in attendance.
Perfect, okay. Any other
And-
abstentions?
And I'll also abstain Doug Delina for the treasurer's office, DALENA.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
and I will abstain as well, as I was not a member of the committee. I just made the motion to get it on, or seconded to get on the
Okay.
vote. Jamie Cosgrove.
And that's Jamie.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 3 abstentions, no opposed, others in favor. All right, well, I think that that's the end of the consent agenda, and I think it's going back to you, Eric, for the agenda item number 4.
Sure. So, kind of coming out of a couple other board committee meetings, we thought it would be a good idea to have a conversation with this committee regarding our evaluation framework, kind of talk about how we approach impact reporting and impact assessment, and kind of get this committee up to speed as to what we're doing. And then at the end, I'd like to save a little bit of time for a discussion around process, which is kind of what sparked this, one of the things that sparked this presentation. So with that, I will kick off. So I'm going to start kind of from reverse. Here's what we do from reporting, and let's work backward to how do we get there. So as an organization, I think there really are 3 big deliverables from reporting that we focus on an annual basis. There's our annual comprehensive financial report, or our ACFR, which we've been doing, and Dan, Jane, feel free to correct me, but I believe since 2014. And ACFR is really the gold standard in terms of government accounting and reporting. Within this, the front section is the financial statistics. It's basically our audited financials. The back section of it is what is known as the non-financial statistics, which is our primary impact report. So that's where we load in basically everything that we've done since inception, and including the most recent year. There's some narrative about what we've accomplished. I've tried to make it as readable and digestible of a document, but it's not light reading. It's not something you want to flip the pages on when you're sitting on the beach to relax. Well, maybe you do, but it depends on your taste. It's pretty dense. It's pretty heavy, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. Our annual report, I like to think of this as the concentrated version of the ACFR. It's really that one distilled into, here are the key takeaways. So takeaways of our financials, but also the takeaways of what was our impact for the year. And then we do a bunch of societal impact reporting, just kind of updating fact sheets that we have on the ready, depending on who we're meeting with and what story we are looking to tell. And there are other deliverables that we have to get out throughout the year in terms of either statutory reporting that is linked to some of this impact, or covenants related to other transactions, such as our green bonds that we've issued. So, kind of how do we get there? And basically, we've always tracked a lot of data, and since I came in, I've tried to organize and build systems around what we are tracking and how we are tracking that. So we set our metrics every year really around 4 items. So number of projects that we say we're going to do. So, hey, how many roofs are we going to put solar on? How many energy efficiency projects are we going to support? How many financial transactions are we going to support? We set a goal around that. We don't really say where, from a location perspective, we're going to do things, but location we add in here because we're certainly tracking and making sure that we are hitting targets around vulnerable communities, and I'll get into that a little bit further later. But so that is really key. We want to make sure that 40% of our investment and 40% of our activity are accruing to those vulnerable communities. We're tracking installed capacity, so that's the estimated and actual generation or potential energy savings, size of batteries, and then we're looking at capital deployed, which we are defining as basically think of it as the total project cost that we're supporting. So there's our portion, there's the portion that's supported by the project owner. There's also a portion that is supported by potentially by incentives that are coming from other sources, but also there could be other lenders into a project. So it's overall project cost is kind of what is the easy way to distill that down. Kind of guiding all of that and translating these key metrics is our evaluation framework. And this is something that we developed with Dunsky Consultants and Opinion Dynamics going back to 2014, 15. It was fully approved by the board in 2016. And this is really, this includes what's called a program logic model. And that program logic model is kind of saying, hey, here are the inputs that we're taking and here's what we're expecting to get out. That, hey, we're deploying money to lower the overall cost of clean energy, increase the amount of emissions that have been avoided, the number of jobs created, positive impacts on public health, so on and so forth. And then we're using that in the reporting that I mentioned previously. The evaluation framework is really the translation key from one set of metrics into what we're reporting on. So within this evaluation framework, and I'm happy to circulate that for you guys to take a look at, is a section with three big areas. There's customer privacy policy, which we've recently updated. The Audit, Compliance, and Governance Committee reviewed that and recommended that to the board for their approval, which the board did approve in January. So we now have a much stronger data policy, privacy policy than we had. We're still working on implementing pieces of that, but we've come a long way. We have what's called the Data Collection and Analysis Protocol, which is kind of a heavy-duty glossary of when we say X, this is what we mean, and this is how we're sourcing it. And then we have societal benefits, and that's really how we're taking these other inputs and translating that into more tangible societal impacts. And those are really falling into 5 categories that we focused on. And as I go through these, I'm more than happy to take suggestions of other things that we should be looking at. First, we have energy and energy savings. This is basically how much are projects generating. It's pretty straightforward. We have estimates that we get in terms of generation whenever we're approving a project that involves generation. We have estimates of savings ranging from CPACE, where we're having a technical underwrite that says, hey, we expect this to achieve a savings to investment ratio greater than 1. These are the expected savings on an annual basis, lifetime, so on and so forth, to SMART-E, where we're using the utilities program savings document, which has standard expectations around energy savings. Sometimes we have actual monitoring around this, especially on the generation side. we take these and we have built our own methodology to estimate customer savings. So we're basically saying, hey, we know how much you expected to save, or we know how much you are generating. What would it have cost to buy that power from Eversource or United Illuminating? We know what your financing costs are. The difference between that should be the customer savings on this project. There are others that we have not really built out in here around renewable thermal technology, and other types of infrastructure that we've supported. So I think combined heat power, anaerobic digestion, in terms of kind of those generation aspects. We talk about our societal impacts in terms of environmental protection and public health. So going back to 2017, we made a big overhaul of what we were doing here under the guidance from DEEP. At the time, we had been using the EPA's eGrid model, which is an emissions model, air quality model, and EPA had come out with a new model called AVERT, which is the Avoided Emissions Reduction tool, I believe, if I'm remembering my acronyms correctly. And AVERT is a much more advanced, much higher quality model that looks at it's more specific around, or at least it was initially built around power generation and offsetting power generation. So it takes the merit order dispatch and says, hey, you're bringing on this technology. Here's the generation profile of this technology. Over the past year, here's what has been brought online through the merit order dispatch. And this is what this is going to be offset. So if I'm bringing on new solar, this is the time of day it's going to generate. Here are the peaker plants that are no longer going to have to come online because we have additional supply coming in. So in being that these are the plants that are not going to be brought online, these are the emissions from those plants. So this is what you're offsetting. It also looks at air dispersion. So where are those emissions going to be saved? So, and where that wind is blowing, let's say. And that's not that important when we're talking just about emissions reduction, but that becomes much more important when we look at public health. So, and the outputs from emission savings go into public health. We need to develop methodologies around water, waste, land preservation. I'm speaking to Lee's World in terms of environmental infrastructure. These are items that are on our to-do list. In terms of economic development, we have a model that we use to estimate job creation through our programs, and one that estimates tax revenue generation for the state. We have done some estimation around GDP growth with the utilities. It's not my favorite tool because it's a pretty black box. We know what the inputs are. We have no idea what it does with it. And I believe the model is close to 30 years old, but so it's not something we found that has been that useful to talk about, but funding taxes and jobs to be much more tangible economic development stories to tell. Community, we're really tracking vulnerable communities. And the other area that's on our radar is really ratepayer savings. So how do we estimate overall savings to ratepayers based off of our activity? So where we've talked about energy burden reduction under energy, think of ratepayer savings as the more macro impact of that. This evaluation framework, we're looking to refresh this to include environmental infrastructure, make sure that our program logic model is broad enough, that we're setting up the framework to build out these other societal impact methodologies as we progress. We're looking to do that this spring. The RFP is currently sitting in my inbox that I need to finalize, and we will issue shortly. Feel free to jump in with questions anytime. I'm now going to progress and kind of talk through the different areas, the different impact methodologies. So I'm Under energy impacts, we're really talking about solar generation, energy efficiency, and customer savings. In terms of solar generation, as I mentioned, we get estimates for generation for all of our projects. We get actuals from pretty much real-time monitoring for projects that the Green Bank owns or has an economic stake in, or let's call it a more active economic stake. So our subsystems we don't own, but we own the rights to the RECs, to the and TRECs from those systems. So we have real-time monitoring on about 50,000 solar arrays across the state. And then we are looking to borrowers who had borrowed from the Green Bank for solar or for other types of generation to report on what their generation is. And that's a leading indicator of financial performance. So we've done a lot of work over the past couple of years. Corey and his team have done a phenomenal job of building out our asset management function to optimize the number of RECs that we're generating off of our portfolio. And so we built a lot of dashboards and lots of pretty cool visualizations of what's going on there to stay on top of things. And in terms of methodologies, what we're doing here, so we can say, hey, is our generation number right? We're using the same figures that we've submitted for REC creation with NEPool, the New England Power Pool, and ISO New England. So we're adhering to their guidance on this. Energy efficiency and our estimates there. I don't know of anything that we have it right now where we're really monitoring energy savings from an efficiency perspective. But as I mentioned, we are getting good estimates for savings on the CPACE side from the technical underwriters. And on the SmartE side, so the other program that we have that uses that's primarily based around energy efficiency, is using the utilities program savings documents, which are annually produced estimates of savings depending on types of jobs. So they have things like, hey, if you your typical electric heating electric boiler upgrade is going to save X amount of kilowatts a year. So we'll take that from there. I guess SBA is also using these estimates or using the program savings documents as well. And those are produced by the utilities and reviewed and approved by the EEB on a regular basis. And then in terms of customer savings, we take our generation or savings number. So, hey, you're generating X number of kilowatts a year or saving Y number of kilowatts a year. And then we are tracking what the customer specific rate is most of the time. Otherwise, we have a decent indication of what that rate is. And we know the financing cost, the difference between the two is customer savings. We reviewed this and Pura endorsed it. So typically, I failed to mention, but typically we'll work on developing a methodology and then we'll look to get buy-in from others in the state that might be more subject matter experts on this than we are. Not saying that we don't become temporary subject matter experts in the process of creating methodologies, but we'd like to have somebody check our work and make sure that we're on the right track. So this is kind of the organizations that I'm indicating are typically who we're leaning on for that external validation. So kind of walking through some examples, I have a dashboard from our Solar Lease 2 product that is obviously no longer in the market, but we still own the systems. They're still functioning, still providing savings to homeowners. It's one thing that we like to monitor to make sure that they are still saving money. So you can see on here a variety of different systems. I've tried to anonymize the addresses and homeowners, but you can see we have overall system size, what the estimated generation was on these systems. I think that is estimated because we aren't using our final number in this dashboard, but oh, sorry, no, that is the estimate. We have the actual generation here in solar PV generation. So And then we have our hypothetical utility expense, which is, hey, we would have, had we purchased this power from Eversource or UI, this is what it would have cost. And then we know what they're paying on for their monthly lease payments, and the difference is the savings. So, I think I have these sorted by the amount saved, or these are our higher savings customers. So if you look at the bottom row, we have somebody who was estimated to generate, what is this, 3.6 kW, they generated 7.4. Hypothetically, had they bought that from the utility, they would have spent $2,100. They are spending $347 a month, so the net difference between that is $1,800 a month that they're saving. I will say that some of our estimates are currently being updated. Corey and his team and our long-term intern UA have been really working hard in developing new estimates based off of LiDAR data from the state and shading and updating a lot of stuff. So we can be more accurate moving forward. And here we have on the left-hand side, this is just one of our dashboards that we're using on a regular basis to monitor various portions of our solar fleet. So on the residential side, under RSOP, where we've had some issues as of late with various third-party owners continuing to support their systems. This is kind of the dashboard that we're using to monitor the number of systems that are reporting and are they generating and over what time. You can see little dips here and there, but systems coming back online. We do have a dip that's recent. We typically get a lot of this data on a lag, so that's not that alarming to us. If that dip doesn't go back up or doesn't start to fill in over time, that's when we start to get concerned, and we'll dig into that. But we are monitoring that these numbers are fairly consistent, especially for the dips over time, and that there isn't one contractor or another that is really getting out of line. On the right, you'll see our energy burden fact sheet. We've helped reduce energy burden for 69,000 families or more, 8,500 businesses. We've deployed more than 732 megawatts for a savings of over 93 million MMBTUs. So at that, I'll move on to environmental and public health. Any questions? I'll pause really quick. Cool. All right, so as I mentioned, in 2017, 2018, we implemented the EPA's avoided emissions and generation tool. We operationalized that. So AVERT at the time was this really, really clunky Excel model, and where one would have to run every project through it. We used a statistical method to derive factors that allowed us to operationalize this and code it without having to actually run the model each and every time. EPA has since adopted our methodology and rolled that out. So every state now has a factor that they can use each year. As I mentioned before, it's an air dispersion model with generation profiles, the annual merit order dispatch. So you're showing what you're taking offline by inserting new renewable generation or different type of generation. And it gives estimates in terms of emissions reductions, in terms of CO2, NOx, SOx, particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, what is that, ammonia and ozone. So we have implemented, we've not implemented the ammonia and ozone yet. We will do that this year. The board approved that previously. It's just taken us a while to prioritize that and get that into our reporting. So we run that, that's built. We worked closely with DEEP for their review. They highlighted this to us, and then we worked with them to say, hey, we like the way that you've implemented this. They endorsed it. Our audit compliance and governance committee reviewed it, and the board approved it. And that also includes equivalency, the EPA's equivalency calculator, which basically says, hey, if you have reduced CO2 emissions by this much, it's the equivalent of planting X number of trees or taking Y number of cars off the road for a year. So we use that to kind of make this, at least the CO2 portion of this, more relatable. So building on this, we also implemented the EPA's co-benefits risk assessment model as a way to talk about public health. This is something that that we discovered in the process of AVERT, and then we worked with the state's Department of Public Health to review and get their buy-in on. And the way that this works is it takes the emissions that are being reduced out of AVERT and says, okay, we know where the wind's going to blow. And this is where these emissions are going. These are the communities that are impacted. These are the epidemiological models and the number of cases of various diseases that, or various ailments, I guess I should say, that are caused by these pollutants. So these are the communities where you're going to see these reductions. But then it also takes these and assigns an economic cost to each of them. So, hey, if somebody can't work because they're having an asthma attack, it'll assign an economic value to that. And basically, it takes this and assigns an overall economic value to the emissions reductions. The other thing that we are doing in terms of environment and public health impacts, it's kind of even beyond this in terms of reporting. We do a social cost of carbon that Joanna, I think I mentioned at the most recent ACG meeting. I built this out, I think that was 2018 or 2019, using the old White House methodology that I think goes back to 2012. So Joanna highlighted that it does need to be updated, that there has been a new White House social cost of carbon study. So we will look to do that ahead of this year's ACFR. And that is just applying overall societal and economic cost to the CO2 emissions. So that's taking into account future impacts, lack of resilience or need for resilience into that. So examples of what we do and what we're looking at in terms of environmental protection. So what emissions did the residential solar incentive program avoid over its life? So here we have, going back to Green Bay conception in 2012, going through the end of the program in 2021. Here are the emissions that were avoided. The lifetime, over the life of these systems, it's going to avoid 6.1 million tons of CO2 emissions, 4.3 million pounds of NOx emissions, 3.4 million of SO2 of SOx, and 426,000 pounds of particulate matter. So what does that mean? Because even I'm like, what does that do? So run that through public health, and from that we do get a value and we get a range depending on there are a couple of really esoteric factors and how they assign values to mortality. So there's a range between 3.7 million. It would be a sum of all this, but the range is on the mortality side. But you can see these are according to the epidemiological model, this is kind of what we're reducing. We're going to reduce some mortality. We're going to reduce heart attacks. There'll be at least one fewer heart attack based off of this. Sorry, I ran these numbers off of 1 year because the COBRA model doesn't do well off of a multi-year approach. So restricted days. So think of this as like, hey, kids can't go outside and play because air quality is too bad. There are air quality alerts. So 114 fewer of those. due to the arson emissions. With 160 fewer people will have asthma impacts from this. So we get this range of economic values that we then assign to all of this, including our reporting. And then we sum this up with our nice
Sorry, I
fact
was
sheet.
just gonna ask, on that chart, on the dollar amounts, are those per unit, or is that cumulative?
So these
I'm
are
not sure how to read
cumulative.
that.
These are cumulative. This is the value that it's assigned to the change in incidence on this. I can pull, if you're interested, I can pull out of the model what the values that they're assigning. They're also this is also dependent upon what your discount rate that you're using. I ran this with the 2% discount rate. We typically run a higher discount rate here. I think we're typically running a 5% discount rate for our impact reporting, where that is a factor. I did the 2% simply because I was using a new model or a different version of Cobra to get to this. And yeah, that was the default in there.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, this is just our environmental section of our fact sheet reporting on environmental and public health. Economic development. We have two areas that we focus on here: job creation and revenue generation. Job creation, we have a model that was developed by our predecessor going back to 2009, the Clean Energy Fund, that was developed with, at the time, it was Navigate Consulting and DECD. So they worked together in this to say, hey, for how much investment is going to create how many direct job years, depending on type of technology. And we've worked with Navigate Guidehouse, who they're a part of, to update this survey multiple times. So I think it was last updated in 2021 or 2022. So we're due an update, but we typically do it every 5 years-ish. So yeah, we're not relying on the 2009 study. It has been refreshed, and the way the Navigant goes about and does this is they do a lot of micro level interviews in the industry and saying, hey, how many people do you have working? Like, how many projects are you doing? What are your big workload drivers? And they build out and update and develop the model. And this model is dependent on the technology that's being deployed. So solar versus hydro, $1 million worth of solar is going to create a vastly different number of jobs than $1 million worth of hydro. But it also depends on the ownership structure. And that it has to do with kind of the ongoing expectations around O&M. So if you are developing homeowner-owned solar, you're creating less jobs in the long term than you would with the TPO-owned solar. At least theoretically, or according to this model. There's still somebody that's got to do O&M on the systems. It's just there isn't that active monitoring on the TPO side or there isn't that active monitoring on the homeowner and solar side that there is in the TPO. On that ownership structure really plays a greater difference when we start to look at revenue generation. The last thing I'll say on job creation is we are using DECD's factors for indirect and induced jobs, which are kind of directly applicable from what they develop, and we just kind of they try to make sure that those are used statewide. And so every time we refresh this study, we review it with DECD and make sure that this is still in line with their expectations and is reasonable. We do a separate job study with the utilities, which is more of this is kind of a bottom up, the other one's kind of top down. And that's more of a market research, the size of the clean energy industry in Connecticut. But they both end up with estimates at about the same area. when you dig into it, but they're very different methodologies in terms of how we're looking at it and have different purposes that we're using them for. Revenue generation, basically that's tax revenue that we're talking about. What have we created to help other entities in the state? Or what are our projects helping other entities in the state in terms of revenue generation? So we take that jobs model that we developed and we said, okay, all of these people that now have jobs, they've got to pay income tax to the state of Connecticut. And the corporations that are employing them are going to have to pay corporate income tax in Connecticut. There's also sales and use tax potentially, depending on the technology. And there's property tax depending on the technology. So we take that model, and again, it's by financing structure and technology that this produces factors that we then use and have put in here. Again, we reviewed this with the Department of Revenue Services. They have deemed our approach reasonable, and we implemented this in, I think, 2019, 2020. So just kind of looking at some of the factors and looking at, or what are we seeing in terms of job creation? I'll pull up the SMART-E loan program. So SMART-E supports both solar and energy efficiency. And I was reminded by this combined heat and power, which I'll mention that in a second. So looking at this, what jobs have we created or has SMART-E created since it was launched in 2013? We've created about 880 direct job years. Those are jobs that are primarily in energy efficiency, HVAC, some solar. And then the indirect and induced jobs are factors that are based off of the number of direct jobs created. Looking at tax revenue. So what are the taxes that are generated off of that? We've got about $4.6 million from the program that's generated in state individual income taxes, another 3.8 in corporate taxes, 5.9 in sales tax. That's all around HVAC and some small amounts around energy efficiency. So think the tax on buying new windows. Property tax, I was looking at this and thinking, oh my God, what's the one thing that's catching here? And that's why I mentioned combined heat and power. Is looking into my one anomaly on my table and finding that, yeah, we had one person who did a micro combined heat and power through the program way back in 2016. And that is actually taxable from a property tax perspective and increasing the value of the property. So
can I ask, so the 2026 numbers, those are like to date, or is that like what you're expecting for this year? Because like the 2026 numbers just fall up the chart, right?
these are right. So this is calendar year to date. This is what we have done.
Oh, to date. That's what I wanted to understand. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
And our SMART-E program is it's unique amongst our programs in terms of the way that we collect data. It reports on a lag. So the 2026 numbers are yeah, they are trailing. It is calendar year as opposed to fiscal year. So those I'm sure we'll catch up, although we are noticing that the impacts of the tax incentives, so or lack thereof, I should say. So I was referenced the tax study and the factors and kind of looking at different how we break this down in terms of combination of type of technology and ownership structure. So looking here, we have storage that's non-residential, that is financed by not-for-profit banks, so mainly the Green Bank. What type of taxes are those generating? So that's generating a small amount of individual income tax and an even smaller amount of corporate income tax. This one surprised me when the study was produced, but thinking about it, it makes a lot more sense. The EV charging stations produce a decent amount of tax revenue for the state, in terms of per $1,000 deployed to install them. So they're generating across the board because they do get figured into property taxes. There's sales and use tax charged on the sale of everything in there, from the installation to the actual unit itself. And then there's the corporate taxes around it as well. So, and then this is just our economic development fact sheet, and kind of how we've gotten to our claim that we've helped create more than 30,000 jobs as an organization and generated more than $157 million in tax revenue for the state. And the property tax is so low and sales tax is so low primarily because solar has an exemption on both of those. So moving on to community and what we're really tracking here. And I mentioned that we had targets set around vulnerable communities, and where we want to make sure that at least 40% of our activity on a 3-year average is attributing to vulnerable communities. So how do we define vulnerable communities? We actually have 4 different definitions that we're relying upon. There's Public Act 20-5, which means populations that may be disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change, including but not limited to LMI communities, EJ communities pursuant to 22-20, CRA communities, so on and so forth. And so, or anything designated by DEEP. So that's our broad definition within that. We're looking at EJ communities, which is federally defined. So that's based off of census blocks. And for those that aren't familiar, the US Census divides geographically area into what's called census tracts, then census block groups, then census blocks. Blocks, I think, are the smallest geographical unit that the census defines. So at the block group level, it's looking at, is the project taking place in a block group where at least 30% or more of the population is below the federal poverty level. There's also the Community Reinvestment Act, and this is a test at the census tract level of what the mean income, and that needing to be less than 80% of that metropolitan statistical area, which is another census designation's adjusted median income. And then we have low income and disadvantaged communities, the LIDACs, and these are the disadvantaged communities are defined by DECD. Low income, there's also the federal LIDACs, which are defined by EPA, and we've built our own Connecticut-focused EJ screening tool, which at least used to be available federally. We've memorialized that and built our own internal tool to screen projects. We're also tracking here just kind of ethnicity, not of the individual project proponent or project owner, but within the census tracts, and making sure that, hey, we are working in census tracts that are diverse. We're tracking income bands, so income bands of borrowers versus the income bands of various census tracts, credit quality, customer types, market segments, so on and so forth. And then I pulled up an example. This is a tool that's on our website. We built an impact tool called Maya, the mapping analysis of your area. So I've pulled up what have we done in distressed municipalities. That's the DECD definition since inception. So we've supported 19,000 projects and deployed more than 1.2 billion in the state of distressed municipalities since the Green Bank came into existence. And you can see kind of how we're tracking against our Justice 40 targets over here on the right. So quickly, what are we working on? As I mentioned, we're trying to implement the new pollutants from Avert that were previously approved. We're trying to expand the usage of Avert for EVs and storage. We have an update to the data collection system. So we're working on a big multi-year project to kind of overhaul Engine, and Salesforce Engine is the platform for Smarty. Salesforce we use for everything else. We're looking at where Smarty needs to fit longer term, while streamlining and standardizing everything on Salesforce. We're currently working on, as I mentioned, the updated program logic model and evaluation framework to make sure that we're inclusive of environmental infrastructure and resilience. We want to get our non-generation related emissions reductions. So this is referring to EI as well as waste avoidance and food diversion. So we have a plan of attack there, but need to get the program logic model done before we get those in. On the horizon, so kind of coming up, where there are other methodologies related to EI, update the social cost of carbon, as I mentioned, transition from using estimated generation to actual. So we have all this actual data. We aren't actually using that to report the emissions reductions. We're using the estimates. That's based off of what we had available and what was possible when we built things. And now we're able to handle big data much better. And so we're working on making those adjustments. Ratepayer cost savings, as I mentioned previously, and a new impact reporting site in the next. It's been our to-do list for the past couple of years, but I think there are many things we want to get done ahead of it, but it is on our list, on our radar. So kind of to the crux where I'd like to have a conversation is kind of the process that we've used in the past and what do we want to do going forward. So in the past, we typically would work on methodology development in-house. We would work with outside stakeholders. So this could be anything from working with Navigate and Guidehouse to update and develop the jobs and tax study, then making sure that we had DCD and DRS sign off, and then bringing it to the board for review and approval. So we would typically go through the Audit, Compliance, and Governance Committee, and then to the board. And this was done primarily because the thought was, hey, the ACFR is our official statement on our financials. It's also our official statement on the impact that we're making. Hey, our auditors are selected and approved, and our methodology is reviewed by the Audit, Compliance, and Governance Committee. So they're also should be overseeing what we're doing in terms of reporting for non-financial things. At our most recent ACG meeting, the committee really felt that they didn't have the subject matter expertise outside of the financials to opine on our methodologies. And they said, hey, this is a deployment committee thing. They should really own the governance around our impact reporting. So I'm kind of coming to you guys today to get your thoughts on, is this something that the deployment committee would want to own? Are there other processes we may want to take? There's nothing in our bylaws at this point that would require the review by deployment or by ACG for that matter to adopt something here. But I do say I like having the evaluation framework. I like having official methodologies. I like being able to say, hey, we have something that's had the tires kicked and has been formally approved for reporting. So with that, I'll pause for your thoughts and reaction.
Eric, I have one question on this. Did the audit committee suggest that it be switched over, the review be switched over to deployment, or that there be some sort of parallel review among the two committees?
They suggested that it be switched to deployment.
And how often does this happen in a year? Is this a once a year review or?
It's kind of as needed. I try to keep it to once, maybe twice a year of, hey, here's the new methodology that we're developing, or there's been a big enough change to something that I think that I'd like to have outside, or make sure that the board is at least aware.
Right. Other
the-
questions?
And there are other things that we could think about in terms of the level of oversight that deployment wants to have. It's this, hey, we want to approve of everything, or do you want to report out on an annual basis of here's what we're using, here's what we're working on developing, here's where we've received endorsements around what we're using. So I think there's a range of process that we could take here.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to come back to the committee with a proposal at the next meeting.
Did others have questions or observations?
This is Lonnie. I just was going back to what you said early on about, oh, wait a minute. Am I live? Oh, I guess I am.
Yep, we can hear you.
What you said early on about how do we, when and how do consumers realize financial benefits from everything we're doing? Because that clearly is going to the heart of what we're dealing with going forward in many ways. And I was just in Branford. Our school bus team is doing just a remarkable job. Going to launch the first electric bus squadron, and it's coming out of Branford, which is going to be great. And a big sort of sales part of that, because in addition to the health and all that, but of the vehicle to grid charging component.
Mm-hmm.
And I had Kevin Moss, do some math for me. I said, well, what kind of money are we talking about? And so Branford would be getting 44 new buses. And we have this terrific company, Zoom, that's going to be running this situation. And the buses in the summer, when they're lying fallow, will be sending energy back to the grid. And he was saying, he did the math. It could range from $5,000 to $10,000 a summer per bus. And we're getting 44 new buses. And then hopefully the utilities will compensate for that input.
Mhm.
And then the next question is, and I was talking to a whole bunch of folks there, where does that money go? Now, obviously Zoom would get some of it, but when does it go back to like the school budget? Since we all know property taxes pay for schools. And I know in Branford, it's, almost 60% are paid for by property taxes. So you start to think about how can we kind of do some thinking and get some lessons learned to kind of try to make sure that communities will be experiencing, a lot of different positives, and including financial.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Bert, I see your hand raised. Is it with regard to the buses? If not, I'll take a stab.
Yes, it's with regard to the comment that Chair Reed just made. Chair Reed, my understanding is that the Branford school system is in the process of negotiating a revenue share agreement with Zoom. So that's that's certainly in process in terms of negotiation between the parties. But I think you're right in terms of there's value there, and there should be some recovery of that value, since but for the riding the kids around and providing those school buses, there wouldn't be that benefit there. So you're spot on.
Yeah. Now, it just occurred, I'm just thinking in terms of how do you sell it, and that's one of the ways you do, and particularly given the pushback that's coming on now about public benefits and all of that. I mean, to be able to make our own case that way.
And then this is one of the exciting things about my job, is to figure out how do we capture that and how do we talk about that. And I think that's certainly something that we should capture in terms of the amount of budget relief that our projects are providing for school districts. I think is certainly a story that we shouldn't be telling yet, but by 2030 we should be.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments or questions?
Eric, it's Joe, just one comment, which is I think at least I would be willing to entertain, and probably like to hear from others on the committee, entertain a specific proposal as to what a review by the deployment committee might look like.
Okay. I will work on something with a couple different options for you to react to. Cool.
Right.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to go through all of this with you. I hope my excitement about this comes through or came through, but so thank you. With that, is there any other business?
Eric, I would just say, on behalf of the committee, I thought this was very interesting, and you
Yeah.
shared some very useful examples. Lonnie brought up a very current example, which is complicated. So these metrics are critical to get
Yeah.
right. So I think it's important that somebody do it, and to the extent the other committee thinks we're more equipped, we would entertain it. But it was a good overview, much appreciated. So is there any other business folks want to raise? If not, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, and a second.
Is Dominic, I'll second.
All right. Assuming everyone's in favor, thank you all.
Thank
Good
you.
day.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Yep. Bye.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.